Good afternoon. I'm Dan McClellan from successnc.org, and welcome to today's webinar entitled The Flipped Class, a Creative Way to Engage Students. This webinar is brought to you by North Carolina Community Colleges and Success NC. During today's session, we'll define what a flipped classroom is, we'll discuss its advantages, and identify ways to implement this model in the classes that you teach. Our presenter today is Emily Robertson. Emily is the Educational Technology Coordinator at Gardner-Webb University, where she's responsible for training faculty and staff in using technology to meet educational goals. She has a Bachelor of Arts degree in American Sign Language and a Master of Arts degree in Educational Technology from Appalachian State. And in just a moment, I'll turn it over to Emily, and we'll begin the presentation. Now, throughout today's session, we do want to hear from you, so please type your questions and your comments in the chat box, which is located on the right side of the screen. I'll be watching the chat box and capturing all of your questions, and we've scheduled some time today at the end of the webinar to address all of your questions. Once again, thank you for being here, and I will go ahead and turn it over to Emily.
Thanks, Dan. Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be joining you today. There is a new buzzword in education these days, and you may have heard of it. It's called the flipped classroom. It's also been referred to as flipped teaching or reverse instruction. This afternoon, we're going to discuss what the buzz is all about, and I'll start by sharing just a little bit of background and how and when the flipped classroom came onto the scene, and then talk about what it is and isn't, and how you might incorporate it into your own instruction. First of all, what is a flipped class? We'll explore this in detail as we go along, but the basic concept is that what was traditionally done in the classroom, specifically lecture, is now done at home through the means of technology and other resources. What was done at home, like homework and problem sets, is now done inside the classroom. Several years ago, two Woodland Park High School chemistry teachers from Colorado, Jonathan Bergman and Aaron Sams, featured on the left, stumbled onto a real creative idea. Both of these teachers were expending a great deal of time and effort to help students get caught up from missing class, usually because of illness or extracurricular activities. They found some basic software that allowed them to record lectures and then archive them online for students to access at home. The result, though, was that other students in the class used them too. Students were able to review these lectures at home and then came to class already having an idea about the lecture and the content material. This is similar to what we're doing today, recording the lecture, and then students or instructors who were unable to attend or those who want to review can do so on their own time. These two teachers decided to capitalize on this idea and began pre-recording lectures. Students would access them prior to coming to class. This approach freed up time in class that had been previously designated for lecture. Now they could utilize the precious class time for in-class discussion, in their case chemistry labs, or to just work on activities like homework. Bergman shared that this approach actually humanized his classroom because he now had time to work individually with students. Now, you may have also heard of another popular name, Salman Khan, founder of Khan Academy. He's featured on the right. And around the same period of time, Khan, who has degrees from both MIT and an MBA from Harvard, had been working as a hedge fund analyst. But on the side, he had been tutoring his niece in mathematics. When other relatives wanted to participate, he decided to record these tutorials and then post them on YouTube, which was in its infancy. Now the students, his relatives, were able to watch the lessons as many times as they needed to on their own time and at their own pace. By late 2009, Khan decided to leave his full-time position and began focusing on what is now Khan Academy. To date, his nonprofit organization has offered nearly 200 million lessons through video capture around the world. I recently had the opportunity to hear Khan speak at a conference, and it was really fascinating to hear his story and vision for education. There are certainly lots of other leaders that I could highlight who are in the field and who are taking up this challenge and using this instructional approach called flipping the classroom. Let's take a moment first to compare a traditional classroom approach and a flipped classroom approach. This is certainly not to assume that all traditional classes are boring with disengaged students, but it does challenge us to rethink how we are reaching our students. In a traditional classroom, when an instructor is lecturing, they're the only active participant in many cases. This is often referred to as the sage on the stage. Some students may tune out, while others are desperately trying to capture every word in their notes. They often miss the significant points because they are trying to transcribe the instructor's words. We then turn them loose and hope that something sticks. And when the students get back home or to their dorms, they try to regurgitate the word-for-word notes into homework activities. As instructors, our expectation is that the students will have the ability to interpret the lecture information into application. But the students may experience a great deal of frustration, and it may affect their motivation and future participation. For the students who have checked out, they don't fare any better either. They show up to class ill-prepared with incomplete homework. The instructor continues lecturing, and so does the cycle. Additionally, and admittedly, probably one of the most difficult challenges for instructors is that we often teach based on dates and deadlines, and we all know that there's a certain amount of content that has to be covered in a certain period of time. Unfortunately for our students, that means that whether a student comprehends the material or not, we have to move on to the next chapter to stay on schedule. Or possibly an instructor won't even know the level of comprehension of their students until after the first exam, which may include several chapters, often of which are the basic building blocks for scaffolding lessons. Also in a traditional classroom, the students are working on the homework at home, and so they're not able to ask questions in that moment. And so when we use the flipped classroom model, instructors pare down the traditional long lecture into small, meaningful tutorials through audio or video. They may refer students to interactive websites or expert videos online, or even challenge them to read articles and encourage students to post their reflection in a discussion board. Now, when the student arrives to class, they've already been exposed to the material. An instructor might devote the start of class to reviewing the material, maybe even giving a quick assessment to check the level of understanding. Time can be spent answering questions or even clarifying naive or misconceptions. The rest of the time is to work on homework, labs, and class projects. The instructor uses this quote-unquote freed up time to interact with the students more as what's called a guide on the side. So the content is delivered through video tutorials, podcasts, interactive websites, but then in the classroom, the instructor is able to actively engage with their students one-on-one. If there is a misconception or maybe a complete miss or they need to backtrack on some of the lecture, they can do that. They can stop the class right there on the spot, engage those students, have a class discussion on the spot, and then those students are working on activities in the classroom. They can ask the instructor right in that moment, how do I do this? Or I'm stuck on this question. And the instructor can be there in those times and really address their questions rather than the student having to wait a long time to ask and get those questions answered. Some of the benefits of using this approach is that the students who miss class due to illness or other activities aren't missing out on that content, and so they can catch up whether they're traveling on the road or even at home in bed. Students who maybe need more time to process information are able to do so at their own pace. They can ruminate on the material before asking questions or participating in class discussions. Often, if you do have a class discussion while material is being presented, some of those students that have really good examples or comments maybe just haven't processed that material or need that extra time to think about what they'd like to say. And so that can happen at home while they're watching these videos. Using the flipped class model also allows a student to watch, pause, rewind the material again and again as many times as they need, rather than having the instructor repeat the material over and over. Students can write down thoughts and questions, bring them to class, be ready to participate, or maybe have that activity online where they're using technology tools like Skype and chat, discussion boards, or even something like VoiceThread to post questions and discuss topics outside of class. On the instructor side, they can now utilize this precious class time to work one-on-one with the students that really need their attention. They can query their students and really have a strong idea of the students' level of understanding. I love the idea of really knowing your students, how they learn, how they express their comprehension, rather than just knowing them by a score on a test or as a letter grade. Another benefit is that the class can continue outside of the four walls of the classroom. This means that learning is taking place all the time, not just during the once or twice a week scheduled meeting time. Now, I do want to point out a couple of things that flipped classroom is not. By no means is it a replacement for instructors. You are the experts. It's really about repurposing the class time for workshop application. And it's definitely not about putting up your feet. If someone says that this is flipping the class, they have missed the entire point. An instructor should be on their feet, working the room, grabbing the attention of the class when they need to, or working side by side or collaboratively with students. A flipped class should be an atmosphere of activity. Lastly, this isn't about students just watching videos at home. It is so much more than that. If our students can access videos online and search for content online already, we have to make coming to class meaningful and worthwhile. I don't think that flipping the class is the answer or solution, but rather it's another tool available to instructors. So let's look at some of the tools, the technology tools that you can use to make that happen. I love this quote by Dan Spencer, who's one of the instructors that uses the flipped approach in his classroom. He says, we don't use a tool for the sake of using tools. We use a tool when it's appropriate for the job at hand. And that's really important to keep in mind as I cover some of these technology tools. Consider what's the best tool for you and what can you use that will help you accomplish these goals. There are lots of different video options, such as Camtasia. Jing is the baby brother of Camtasia. It's a free version of that software. YouTube is a great place to house videos. You can use something called Skitch or Screener. Screencast-O-Matic is a free software. And then I have several iPad apps listed, such as ScreenChomp, Show Me Whiteboard, which you can actually post to an online location, and also EduCreations. In terms of audio, there are some great softwares out there, such as Audacity, AudioBoo. You could even use just a basic handheld recorder and then upload those MP3s. You could also use what's called a live scribe pen, and this is a way to capture lecture as well. In terms of some other approaches, you could use a PowerPoint and then add audio to it to make it more of a full presentation. Prezi is another example where you can take your students on a journey and then add that audio with it. SlideShare is a place where you can upload PowerPoints and PDF files and even add audio, and you can send your students to this online location or even embed it in a learning management system. VoiceThread, I'd love to highlight just for a moment. You can add files, images, audio, and then encourage your students to go and participate. They can text their answers or opinions. They can participate in a discussion calling in on the phone and using their voice, or they can even record themselves on video and post that. And so it's a real neat and interactive tool. A lot of these you could send to students via email. You can upload them to a particular site that houses videos like Vimeo, or you can upload them and embed them in a learning management system. Whatever works best for your approach. Now, a couple things to keep in mind when we talk about creating these video and audio tutorials. Time. I would encourage you, don't take an hour lecture and then just put it right into a video. That's a long time to watch a video, and really you need to keep it to 10 minutes. Ideally would be the best, but certainly you could stretch it out to 15 or 20 minutes. If you feel like there are multiple things that you need to communicate to students, then maybe separate those out into individual video segments. Don't worry about the production quality. I think students really appreciate that humanized approach, and they're more interested in interacting and seeing you. I refer to FaceTime, not necessarily the iPad app, but maybe just putting your face on the screen while you're sharing this lecture. Think about just being yourself, presenting the material just like you would in a regular classroom, and then use the tools that are available. If you want to try out some tools, see if this approach will work for you, and then maybe later, if you're interested in really getting some robust software, then you can upgrade and see what else is out there for you. Couple things about putting it into application. Jonathan Bergman, one of those instructors that I featured at the beginning, he says that flipped classroom is not a synonym for online videos. And when most people hear about that flipped class, all they think about are videos. But it's really about the interaction and the meaningful learning activities that occur during the face-to-face time that it's most important. So I do want you to remember that it's not purely about the videos. That's just one tool to present the content to your students, but it's what happens in the classroom when they come after they've reviewed that material that's really important. How are you engaging those students now that you have this freed up time? What activities can you do to really put what they've learned at home and put that into application, and challenge them to think not just on that surface level, but have them dig and ask those challenging questions. I really love the flipped classroom model that Jackie Gerstein uses, and she has this cycle that really gives what she calls the full picture. And you can see in the bottom right corner, it talks about the concept exploration, the what. This is where we're putting those content-rich websites, those video and audio lectures. When they're at home and they can reflect on those either through blogging, maybe they make their own reflective video. They could even take, let's say, practice tests to really see if they understand the material, and practice that over and over. When they get to class, they can present and demonstrate that they understand that information. And then to have that experience in the classroom, whether it's through experiments in class or activities, even community and group projects, and you can see how that cycle just continues. In terms of activities, some suggestions, you might consider using what's called a think, pair, share. This is where when students have been exposed to the material ahead of time, when students come to class, maybe you put up a question on the board and have them think on their own, brainstorm what they think about it, and maybe make some notes. Maybe they can do some journal, and then divide your class up into pairs and have them share in groups about what each of them thought, and start a discussion in a small group. And then after a little bit of time, open that up to a larger class discussion. So now each of those groups is discussing as a whole large group in the class. Another example is giving problem sets or labs. You could have in-class writing projects where maybe the students start working on their papers in the class, not at home and bringing those as drafts, but they start that process right inside the classroom. Maybe the students come with a prepared draft and then they exchange them and give feedback to each other and work collaboratively. They could even use tools like Google Docs, where they're on the computer and they are collaborating and working and editing on a document at the same time. And then group projects, having the students work on something together and then really allowing the students to lead how they are showing that they understand and comprehend this material. Put the power back in their hands and allow them to become more of an independent learner, and give them the opportunity to reflect in their own way. Maybe it's through a blog, maybe it's through coming up with a game online and designing something like that, and that the students have the opportunity to express their comprehension. The rest of the students benefit as well. In class, instructors might have students create and collaborate and then put into practice what they've learned from the online lectures or from the in-class discussions. Instructors might even flip the role and have students teach each other as well. Flipping the class doesn't mean that you should throw out your entire approach to teaching, nor does it mean that you have to flip everything. As I've said, this is just one tool, and you may find that you start with just flipping a few select class sessions or even a particular subject or segment of a class. Lastly, there are just a few resources that I'd like to share with you for you to check out and explore if you're interested and want to learn more about flipping the class. There are tons of example videos, tutorials, chat rooms, discussion boards about flipping the classroom. Like I said, it is the hot topic in education these days, and there is so many resources available online. In fact, there's even a conference that's going on about it. And so I really challenge you to embrace the flip. I've got lots of online resources listed, such as the Khan Academy. There are videos online that you can refer students to. They even have embedded activities for students to practice. Apple has tons of online classes available through iTunes, and many institutions and instructors are posting their lecture, so you could even bring a guest lecturer into your class through videos. TED Talks are a great example of what's happening in education, and there are lots of ideas that are going on and being discussed, so use this as a resource as well. MIT has OpenCourseWare. TeacherTube is actually the YouTube version for teachers, so you may check out other teachers' posts or even just explore YouTube as well. And then PhET is an example that Bergman and Sams use. This is chemistry and mathematical examples, lots of how-to tutorials, and shows labs and equations. And so this would be a great resource for those of you in those particular fields. There are also two books that I'd refer you to. One of them is Flip Your Classroom, Reach Every Student in Every Class Every Day. This is a new release that just came out this summer by Jonathan Bergman and Aaron Sams, and then also Jackie Gerstein's The Flipped Classroom, The Full Picture. There are also other online resources. There's a great infographic that describes the flipped classroom with statistics and images on Newton.com. And then there are several network and discussion boards listed here as well. I thank you so much, and I encourage you to embrace the flip, and I welcome any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Emily. We did get a few questions through the chat box. I'll put those on the screen, and we'll start with the first one. So the first question is, what if students live in a rural area and don't have access to the Internet? Or I'm also guessing that we're concerned about students who maybe have only dial-up or some slower Internet connection.
Sure. This is definitely an important question. We really have to know our audience, and if they can't access the material because of lack of resources like access to the Internet, it certainly challenges us to think more creatively. The answer may be as simple as encouraging students to use campus or public library computer labs, but often they may not be able to because of work, or sometimes the libraries have a limitation on how long you can use the public computers. And instructors might consider burning the videos onto DVD and sending those home. And because it's not only about videos, there might be other resources that could be used at home. I do think that this is a challenge that we're facing on a larger scale as we rise to meet the 21st century learner. We also don't want to leave those other users behind. So it is a balance and trying to find what works best for you, the instructor, and for your students.
Okay, the next one, are you suggesting I throw out all my lectures and make videos? I learned just fine through lectures when I was in school. What do you think about this, Emily?
Absolutely not. I do think that lectures still have a place in education, but I think it's beneficial for all instructors to evaluate what's working and what isn't, what's engaging our students, and perhaps class time can be balanced between lecture and intentional activities. I don't necessarily think that the flipped class is a one-size-fits-all answer, nor do I think that it lends itself to every subject. And as the instructor, you're the expert. So you know the content and you know where your students struggle the most. Flipped class is just one tool out of many that you could utilize to engage your students.
All right, so the third question, and we received several questions kind of along this same topic. What about students who don't watch the videos? How do you address that as an instructor when your students don't do the activity at home that they're supposed to?
Sure. I think we deal with this now when students don't read the material before coming to class or aren't participating. Maybe they're surfing the Internet, texting, or even sleeping sometimes. I think you have to address it in the same way that you would in any other course with class management. And I think the difference is that because you have that one-on-one time with a student during the class, they can't hide or be as passive as they could be before. And you can really take advantage of that time to sit and ask the student directly if they're reviewing the content at home. Are they taking notes? What questions do they have? Maybe utilizing those mini assessments at the beginning of the class will give you that feedback, and maybe it'll spark a little bit in that student that, oh gosh, you know, to participate in this class, I'm really going to have to be that independent learner at home.
All right, the last question is, do you have any tips for getting started? How can an instructor get started using this model?
Sure. Probably the first thing I would say is start small. Don't try to dive in and flip everything. I would encourage you to use the tools that you have at your disposal and that you're comfortable with. And then later you can add more layers to that flip. I would suggest testing it out a couple times and maybe asking your students for honest feedback. What worked for them? What didn't? You know, was this approach effective? Did they find that the in-class activity was beneficial, and really tweak it from there and craft it to what works for you. And just like anything new, it's probably going to take some trial and error to find out what works best for you and your students. And then the last thing I would encourage you is maybe grab some fellow colleagues who are interested in trying this out so you can work together. You can brainstorm and share resources and really have a great support system to flip your class.
Excellent. Thank you, Emily, and thank you for submitting those questions. As we wrap up, I'd like to remind you to check out successnc.org for other helpful videos and webinars. A special thanks to our presenter, Emily Robertson, for sharing with us today. This concludes our webinar, and on behalf of North Carolina Community Colleges, thank you for your participation, and have a great day.